Among the other areas he's worked in is economics, and what first made me think he would be a great speaker here is also his somewhat different vision of economics, a much more ecologically much more ecological view of economics, certainly than is the dominant in the world, the business world, and much of the political world. So I thought it would be interesting to hear that view, and perhaps with questions as to how this different view of economics might make a difference in our work, in our advocacy, as we are all trying to create a cleaner and better world. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and it's a delight to be with you and to be invited to speak as a visionary. Many years ago, the Utne Reader named me one of the world's 100 leading visionaries, and then they held a visionary sort of event at Town Hall in New York City, and there was about 20 of us visionaries who were able to get there. And I was the 5th visionary to speak. We had 5 minutes to be visionary. And I noticed that the other 4 speakers before me had very thick glasses, as I do. And I realized that maybe one of the prerequisites for being a visionary is you really can't see at all. So there should be a caveat on my being here today. Additionally, I am a lawyer. I have to come up front and just say that right away. And I'm a Washington, D.C. lawyer. And so that is one of the most least respected species on Earth, I think. And I actually recently had a taxi driver asked me a bioethical question, which I couldn't answer. Said, what's the difference between a lawyer and a sperm? And he said, well, the sperm has at least 1 in 1 million shot at becoming a human being. So, if that's the only thing you remember in the speech, I'll be really upset. I have, we've done a lot of work on, on the organic movement. We helped put together the original bill that created the organic movement. We have done a lot of work on genetic engineering. We have a Supreme Court case right now against Monsanto that we're working on. The oral arguments April 27th. We've done a lot of work on agriculture and global warming. So as an attorney in both in the massive EPA case and on NEPA and a lot of other things, people want to ask questions about that, feel free. And ask where things are in various things in agriculture, organic, or where things are. Happy to answer those questions afterwards. And I like everyone here and all there, most of us spend our lives in this movement, sort of reacting, trying to stop the bleeding, whether it be stopping a clear cut or stopping a GMO plant from getting out there, stopping a factory on the Hudson River, trying to stop the bleeding that's going on all over the world. And of course, global warming gases being a major aspect of that. And then we have to continue to do that. That's very, very, very important. But there's the old Native American story about the tribe, and they are doing their wash in a river, and they see a little baby coming down the river, and they all race in and they save the baby from drowning. And then they look up and there's 2 babies in the river. And they all race into the river and they save the 2 babies. And then there's 3 babies in the river, and they all go running in and they save. And then suddenly there's babies all over the river. And they keep saving, all exhausted, and finally the chief, she looks at the tribe, she says, maybe we should go upstream and see who's throwing all the babies in the river and stop them. And I think that's the double role of every activist. I think we have to stop the bleeding. We have to do all the work we're doing, because otherwise, it'll be too much for this planet, as we all know. Now with the whole biochemistry of the planet is threatened. But we also have to think about the consciousness and the habits of thought and the habits of public policy that create all these problems, because there's never going to be enough of us, and God knows, funding where it is, there's too few of us to do too much work as it is. So I think it's a double job. How do we stop the bleeding, but also how do we change the consciousness that is behind all of these things that we're all working on so hard? How do we change that consciousness? And I think it's a dual role. I think sometimes in our movement these 2 things fight each other. Where those of us who are in the trenches, who are in the Supreme Court, who are doing grassroots organizing, who are doing the hard administrative law or policy work at the state or federal level, say, I don't have any time to read this, vision piece. I'm trying to save the world here. I'm trying to do the good work. And then the people that are doing the vision work, they say, what? Just, Andy, you stopped alfalfa. So what? Genetic engineering alfalfa. Or you stopped that one factory, there's 1,000 more. You know, that bill you just got through Congress it's pretty minimal. So the real work is the visionary work, and your work is, you know, not that important. Both of those are wrong. You know, I think again they need to go together and work much more in synergy with one another, so that we're doing stopping the bleeding, and all of us trying to come to some of the new out-of-the-box concepts that will help change the consciousness, not just for us obviously, but for the general public, and God knows our lawmakers and the judiciary and everyone else. So that's sort of in the spirit of what I'm going to be talking about today, is more the consciousness. Again, I'm happy to take questions on the actual trench warfare that I'm doing and that we're doing, but you know, I want to focus more on that, the consciousness context. And in doing so, you know, I did start with James Thornton in NRDC, the New York office, all those years ago in 1985, doing clean water, NPDES work. So, you know, when I say this, I'm including myself. I think there's been an enormous failure on this conscious level by the entire environmental movement. We've had so many great successes, and I'm not one that says the last 25 years, I mean, I know some people are writing, oh, we haven't done anything. We've done a huge amount and worked very, very hard, and I do not for a moment put down the work of myself and all of us who've been working so hard for so long, and those of us who preceded us. However, I do think there's a failure in consciousness right at the start, that we have not been successful in sufficiently successful in working on. And one is that environmental movement is seen as one of a number of different special interests. You know, there's labor, you know, social justice, the environment, you know, we're part of those groups, you know, there's gender issues, you know, etc. And that's simply not the case. The environment or the ecological movement isn't simply another special interest group. It is the context. It is the context of all struggles. Because you will not have social justice on a dead planet. You will not have labor issues on a dead planet. You know, I often ask the question, you know, raise your hand if you can tell me what isn't the environment. What isn't the environment? It's the context. Again, on a dead planet, on a non-sustainable planet, all the other issues, as important as they are, simply don't exist. So the environmental movement is not another special interest. It's not, oh, we want good, we want workers to be paid, and we want to clean up the environment. No, no. It is the context. And ecological thinking, therefore, it is the only realistic way to look at the problems, the prism to look at the problems we have. Because if we do not prevail in getting this vision through, there will be no society left to worry about the other issues. So we're fundamental, none others. And we have not been successful in getting our lawmakers, we're not in the media, to get that idea through. That, you know, that ecology isn't simply an option, one option among many, it is the only option we have. And that every other issue is dependent on us getting that one right. Every other one. So that, you know, that's just an overall consciousness. And then I think that within that, and this is more focused on the salmon economics piece, there's also kind of a thing that we have is, and Randy Hayes is a good friend of mine, so Rainforest Action Network, and I was talking to Randy about this, who works in my office down in DC, and I was saying, you know, we talk about saving the salmon or saving the trees, saving the rivers, all very important. But I wonder how much we talk about, as environmentalists, learning from them. Do they have lessons to teach in the crisis that we're in? And for me, one of the major crises that we're in is that for the last several hundred years, 240 or 50 years, we've been living under an economic system that is autistic, if I can use that word without offending, to nature. And about a year and a half ago, I was invited to do a lecture. Well, actually, I was invited at the last minute to sub for Carolyn Raffensperger, who is the mother of precautionary principle. It's a great thing, and she's great. Her plane got delayed, and she was supposed to debate people at the Cato Institute on the precautionary principle. Now, for those who don't know, the Cato Institute is a libertarian, free market, Adam Smith, is Christ, kind of organization. And so I substituted at the last minute, and I apologized because the two prior speakers had very extensive presentations on the mathematics of risk and risk assessment. That if you didn't do this mathematics, and the precautionary principle would destroy innovation, and we wouldn't have a society that was profitable, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I got up and said, listen, I know Carolyn is so versed on this, and I'm just a last minute substitute, so there's somebody sitting here, not just the three people supporting the idea that precautionary principle is a catastrophe. I said, but let me just, because I'm not very educated on this subject except in general, let me ask you a question. Left on its own, what aspect of the natural world acts according to human supply and demand needs? And I said, I'll just wait. I don't have much else to say, so I'll just wait, and you guys just raise your hands and tell me which does. Because I know you guys are all for the free market, and so you must have an answer to this. And nobody raised their hand. And I said, well, if you've devised an entire economic system that is completely divorced, as you all just admitted, to the actual laws of nature, don't you think there should be a little bit of precaution in trying to cut all of nature to the Procrustean bed of your ideology, since it doesn't fit by your own admission? There was, again, considerable silence after that particular point. And I think it's really important to realize that the laws of capital, that the laws of supply and demand simply do not comport with the laws of nature. We're in a complete schizophrenic moment. So, for example, if there's tremendous demand for tuna, as we saw in today's newspaper, the tuna don't know that. They don't reproduce like crazy saying, oh my God, there's tremendous demand for us. We've got to get to it, folks. Yeah. And the topsoil doesn't say, you know what, we're going to have 30 more billion people by 2050. Topsoil, let's do it. Come on. Come on. A little more nitrogen. Where's the potash? Phosphorus. Let's go. That doesn't happen. And it won't happen. So you have a collision course of a human-based, anthropocentric supply and demand system that's been in place for a very short time in the ecological history of the Earth, and the actual laws of nature that are the real economy. And I was at Rutgers giving a talk the other day, and I said, does everybody in this audience, and of course everybody here knows, but I'm not sure everybody in the Rutgers audience do, that everything you have on you, your BlackBerries and all that shit, do you know that all did come from the Earth? And I could see there was some confused faces for a moment. Like, oh, does it really? Because it doesn't look like anything that comes from the Earth. I mean, it's all newfangled. Doesn't it come from up there somewhere, or somewhere just make itself somehow, And so I think there's even a failure to understand, what's at the basis of production. So in salmon economics, I said, so we have this problem. We have an unsustainable economic system that is destroying nature at an exponential rate. That is the major bar often to us getting anything through in our public policy. But where do we go from there? I mean, when I was a kid, and I'm older than most people in this room, there was this big struggle between communism and capitalism. I mean, that was the big deal. And that has more or less gone by the wayside. So what else is there but the market system and capital? What else do we have to work with that, right? I mean, what else do we have? So I said, well, wait a minute, wouldn't it be interesting, just out of the box, to come up with an economy as if the Earth not only mattered, but as if the Earth could teach us. And there's a quote here that I like that a depth psychologist came up with. He says, imagine a world in which carpenter knows beaver, lawyer knows eagle, philosopher knows the silence of the deep night. With this connection between human consciousness and the natural world we established, people will make the journey back to the source in nature that inspires their work. And that also reminded me of a beautiful quote of Rachel Carson, who was one of my very favorite people ever. And she says, in contemplating the exceeding beauty of the earth, we have found calmness and courage, for there is symbolic as well as actual beauty in the migration of the birds, in the ebb and flow of the tides, in the folded buds ready for spring. There is something infinitely healing in these repeated refrains of nature. And thinking on those two beautiful ideas, it occurred to me that what would happen if the economist met the salmon? What could the salmon teach the economist? And I'm a wilderness guy. I love going to Alaska and fishing there. And this idea came to me as I was standing in the middle of a river. I'd thrown my fly rod down, and I was just sitting in the middle of the river in the incoming tide and just feeling these coho salmon just hitting my body and running up the stream. It was just a fantastic experience, you know, for me. And I describe it in this piece, Salmon Economics, and you know, I'm sort of in the return aspect of my life and what they euphemistically call midlife. And so the return of the salmon was very comforting and very calming. But I began to say, what would the salmon teach us about economics? What is this beautiful life cycle all about? This is going to teach us anything. So the first thing I thought of was, well, one of the things the salmon do is they go out into the ocean, right, when they're very small. They go out there for a couple of years, and they grow very large. From being just about 6 inches to 8 inches, they grow to be 10 pounds, 12 pounds. Beautiful. Coho are very beautiful, silver in this slash. And they come back up to the river to mate and to die. But what have they gotten out? What have they gotten out in that ocean? Well, they've gotten a lot of things, including nitrogen. So when they go back up the river and they die, that nitrogen and the other, you know, aspects of the salmon get spread over their entire ecosystem. So for example, they did it in Alaska, they did a study, and about 70% of the nitrogen fixation of the plants around those rivers is from the salmon. They're redistributing a huge number of minerals and value. The grizzly bears, and of course that's a very exciting thing in Alaska, the grizzly bears eat the salmon, they go back in the woods, and you know what they do in the woods, according to every known joke in the world, right? Yes, they do that in the woods. And in their dung is all these nutrients. And again, according to these figures in Alaska, and I have it in the piece, it accounts for up to 40 or 50% of the nutrients, including nitrogen, that are these forests are growing in. So, and if you look at not just the grizzly bears, but the other fish species that feed on them, this is a massive redistribution of these valuable nutrients into their entire ecosystem. So what they teach is redistribution. And they also teach, as an economic principle, as a sustainable economic principle, and they also teach reciprocation, right? They're reciprocal because as those nutrients go out, it creates the vegetation along the rivers that actually provide the cover for the reds, which is the name that there is for where salmon reproduce. They need shade. So as they give, they're given. So you have redistribution, you have recycling, you have reciprocation, and then you also have localization, right? Salmon always go back to the very place that they were born. As a matter of fact, they did this study where they had about a several thousand gallon tank, and they put some salmon in it, and they put just 2 little eyedroppers of something from their native stream, and all the salmon went in that direction. They could smell it. And it's really remarkable to see them going these journeys of thousands of miles to this place. So they also teach us about localization. And there's one last thing that they do, and they did for me, and they did for all of the animals that share, their gift giving. Right? So you have redistribution, reciprocation, including recycling and all those. You've got localization, you've got gift giving, 4 economic principles that the salmon teach. Now if you look at every indigenous society, and if you read Karl Polanyi, and if you read all these indigenous societies, what are the major 4 principles of all indigenous economies? Redistribution, reciprocation, localization, and gift giving. And there's not been a single society before ours that has ever allocated its resources according to the market. Not one. There's been markets, sure, but that's not the principal way in which they allocate resources. Never, never happened. This image of cavemen fighting it out in an Adam Smith fashion is completely wrong. It doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, competition is not the major way in which any indigenous society survives. They do it through cooperation. So I was thinking, okay, so that's what the salmon have to teach us as an alternative way of economics. But it's not as if we don't have that in our society. Right? We have redistribution in our society, right? What do we call it? What's redistribution? It's called
Taxes.
taxes. It's called taxation. Remember tax relief? Yeah, it's called taxation. But I've yet to hear the first argument, and this is a huge argument right now, I know the Tea Party folks, where people say, taxation isn't just something that liberals like to try and take away millionaires' money. I find that very satisfying, but many don't. Rather it is a natural economic part of sustainable natural systems. It's how nature does it, and has been doing it for millennia, and has been much more successful than AIG and others in long-term sustainability. And the same with reciprocation, right? The reciprocal relationship in our society is amazing. We did a study at ICTA about 7 years ago. 70% of Americans make their living by taking care of something, not by trying to sell something for more than they bought it for. Nothing wrong with that. I'm a big fan of organic food, and it's a market-based, premium, which is great. Market has a purpose. But 70% of Americans, they're your teachers, they're your doctors, they're all of us in this room. They're everybody working for government. I know it doesn't always seem like they're doing public use, but they are. They're taking care of something. 70%, right? And they're not based on any market principle at all. It's based on reciprocation, right? It's based on it. If firemen see a fire in a millionaire's house versus one in the ghetto, they don't say which is going to get us more money. How will we get more money for the firehouse? They go, and they risk their lives, right? The same thing is true in teachers. My brother and sister-in-law, both of them teaching 30 years in high school. They don't get more or less money. There's no market based on that. But there's this feeling, unless we give in the society in this way, we're not going to be given. Where will our teachers be? Who will take care of our roads? Who will be there if we have a heart attack? Who will be there to do the work to protect land, wilderness, forests, rivers? That's a tremendous reciprocation. We actually live in a care economy much more than we live in a business economy. And that care economy is a natural way of nature. And yet I've never heard our first politician say, our first duty is, as public policy, is to take care of the care economy. I said, small business and this, no one ever says, how do we take care of the care economy? And yet, approximately 70% of us work in that economy, which is not market-based. Localization, I think we're beginning to see that globalization was not a successful way to try and organize the world. And localization is becoming, it's the new fashionable word. Everyone's talking about localization. We have in our agricultural with CSAs, where we're seeing localization as one of the new principles that we need after seeing the disaster that we saw with globalization. We now know that, think globally but act locally isn't just something we've all been saying, it's what the salmon do. They go out globally, thousands of miles, and then they act fundamentally locally in how they do. So that's another, unbelievable thing. And also I think that the gift principle is really critical here. We think of gifts as something we do for, Christmas, which is sort of coerced gifts. At least it is with me and my in-laws. But there's also gift giving that we do all the time with one another, all the time. And it's not privileged, right? The teacher that's spending a little bit more time with a student, regardless of any market principles. When you look at what happened in 9/11, who responded at 9/11? The care economy, right? Those EMTs. Everybody there, they weren't doing that on a market basis, and it's a gift to all of us they did. What did the market economy do? Does anybody remember what Wall Street did after 9/11?
Shut down.
They shut down. Because they wanted to wait and see what was going to happen. Was America really going to be in major trouble? In which case they wanted to pull their investments and go overseas. So they shut it down to sort of wait for 3 days until we can understand what we. So, what we have failed to do in paying attention to the salmon and to natural economics. By the way, I could do this about tree economics. You could do this about river economics. I think the salmon are just such amazing and beautiful and numinous, creatures. What we fail to do is privilege those things in our society that we're already doing, that are already salmon economics. But we never use as I said before, ecology as a prism to look at our issues, and so they are under privileged. What do we call the care economy right now? Does anybody know? In our discussions, the service economy. How's that sound? Doesn't it remind you of somebody, like some kid at McDonald's? The service economy? So think how underprivileged that is as a vocabulary versus the care economy, which is really what it is, which is all you were doing here. So, what have we done to the salmon? Have we listened to what they have to teach us? No. Now, as a matter of fact, we have found this entire life cycle that I've been describing, and hopefully somewhat convincingly of the great wisdom it has to offer us, they find it very inefficient. I mean, why do the salmon have to go up those rivers? First of all, we like to dam the rivers and destroy them for our own purposes. But second of all, it's just inconvenient and it seems awfully inefficient. A lot of waste of energy. So of course, and you know, they also don't reproduce according to our supply and demand. So what have we done with salmon? Aquaculture. Fish farming, right? We actually breed them in these huge pens, just like factories, just like hog factories, and we fill them full of antibiotics. And to sell the meat, we have to put artificial dye in it so they actually look like salmon instead of some hideous white liverish thing, which they actually look like. You know, so we put dye. We use a huge number of hormones, chemicals to try and make them grow in these pens. And because disease is rampant, that's why we have to use the fungicides and the antibiotics. And because we're trying to treat the salmon as a commodity in a supply and demand market, rather than actually learn from where they are. So we're trying to fit the salmon into the, as I said, the Procrustean bed of our economics, rather than learn their economics, and with catastrophic results, because they do escape. 100,000 recently escaped from Maine, and when they get into the native salmon populations, what do?
Right.
They do a number of things. One is they spread their diseases, they spread their sea lice. They then mate with those salmon, and often degenerate the gene pool enormously. And it turns out that Atlantic salmon, which are the favorite of the fish farms, are very aggressive, and they tend to outcompete the wild salmon for their habitat, for these reds I was talking about, for these rivers. This is why Alaska and some parts of Canada have forbidden it, right? Because they'll come in and they'll invade. So instead of your wild salmon being able to reproduce in this manner I talked about, it's your other salmon. But even that was not sufficient. Even that was not sufficient. So when genetic engineering came along, they said, you know what? It's not just that salmon have to go through this tiresome river thing, and we're not even getting to grow fast enough as commodities for what we want, to make them ideally efficient and profitable. So they genetically engineered human growth genes into the salmon to try and make them really big faster with less food. And then when they did some public focus groups, people didn't want to eat human genes in salmon. They thought it was cannibalistic. So they switched it and they started using cow genes and other fish genes. And about 8 years ago, a firm called AquaBounty, which is a Canadian-US firm, applied to the FDA for approval to grow these salmon and sell them commercially, which we then filed some legal actions against, needless to say. And then a couple years later, a couple of researchers at Purdue University began to do research on this, because obviously our government hadn't, nor the corporation. And they realized that these salmon, because they were larger, were more attractive to other fish in reproduction, right? Because these genetically engineered salmon are really big, right? The big salmon are more attractive, particularly the females in reproduction, which explains why I got very few dates in high school, but I took a little time left to go into that. And so the salmon were more successful in reproduction, but because we understand so little about heredity, the physiological changes in these salmon were so damaging to the offspring that there was 1/3 greater death in the offspring. They didn't know this was like, this gene was acting, this genetic cassette was acting in a bizarre way. So you had Darwin on his head. They were preferred in reproduction, but 1/3 greater mortality in the offspring. So this guy, Bob Muir and his partners up at Purdue, they did the math, the terrible arithmetic, and the arithmetic was that if you were to release only 60 of these by accident or intentionally into a population, native population of 60,000, if you work out the generations, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, in 30 years, that population is completely extinct. And the thing to remember about this, getting back to my little story about the precautionary principle, is once these salmon are let loose in a river or in the ocean, you cannot recall them. you cannot take remedial action. It is not even like an oil spill, which is horrible, but will reduce over a period of time. The problem, and this is the problem with genetic engineering in general, is because it's living pollution, so to speak. It reproduces, it mutates, it spreads, and once it's out there, there is no way to say, oops, come back, we're sorry, big mistake. And in the case of salmon, that terrible arithmetic will begin, and there's just no way to stop it. There's no way, it's out, it's gone, it's done. So for the last, I guess, 8 years now, we have stopped it with a variety of legal actions and threats, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. But I think as something to leave you with as this larger issue with our economics is to think of the salmon as kind of a symbol of these two economic systems and the contradictions between the two. One is the economic system that even indigenous societies have had for millennia to be sustainable, and that's reflected in the life systems of salmon, what I mentioned in virtually any other, and is there to teach us, so we shouldn't just protect these things, we need to learn from them. And the other is a 225-year-old system that turns everything into a commodity, I would argue, including humans, and we have seen the ecological and the potentially catastrophic ecological results of when that model is applied to nature. And the salmon are a tremendous example of that. And again, I think what makes this relevant rather than simply completely out of the box is all of those principles in salmon economics we're doing today. We just do not privilege them, and we don't say, you know what, these are natural things that we're doing. And I think they would, even on that level, they would be enormously important for our public debate, today. So that is my salmon economics sermon, and the thing behind it. Let me just finish with this thought. There are some principles behind this that I think are worth thinking about for those of us in this movement. And I'll quickly go through two of them because I'm running out of time. I want there to be questions. One is, what is the ethic behind all this? We talked about changing the consciousness. In this story, I just told what's the ethic that is their mantra. Those that are pushing this. Now, I learned about it when I went I was doing a book on genetic engineering, and I went to see Vern Purcell, who was a researcher out at Beltsville, not too far from here in Washington, Beltsville, Maryland, and he had taken these human growth genes and put them into pigs to try and create like really, really big pigs. I think the idea was sort of pork chops for everyone. And the pig, it had gone terribly wrong though. The musculature of the pig had overwhelmed its skeleton, and it couldn't stand, it couldn't walk, it had to crawl, and it was cross-eyed, but I could only get a picture of it putting it up against a plywood board. And I turned to Vern Purcell, who was doing this on our taxpayer money, putting these human growth genes into the pig, and I said, well, what happened here? And he said, well, the Wright brothers didn't get it, the first time either. I tried to explain the difference between a machine and an animal. I'm not sure that worked. But he said, Andy, the pigs are just simply not efficient enough. And that's what they're saying about the salmon. It's very pretty, your salmon, but it's just not efficient enough. Right? You know what efficiency is, right? Right, maximum output and minimum
input energy.
Right, so minimum input and minimum time. Minimum cost, minimum time, maximum output. That's the law of efficiency. And who's against efficiency, right? Well, what if I told you I treat both of my children efficiently? I have a daughter, Kailani, I have a son, Nicholas. And I give them minimum input of affection and support for maximum good grades and good behavior.
I'm interested.
Good dad? And I just, after 12 and a half years, lost my beloved English setter, Virginia Loyal. And that was the least efficient relationship known to man. She did no work whatsoever. And I lavished food and affection on this animal like you would not believe. Totally inefficient relationship. What about your friends? What if you get a call at 3 in the morning Andy, Bob left me again. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan, I've got to give a talk in NRDC tomorrow. Inefficient relationship. Do we treat anything we care about based on an efficiency basis? Do we? No, no. What do we treat the things we care about? Based on what? What do you treat the things you care about with? Love, yes, we can see, even though we're policy wonks, we can say love. It's okay, it's okay. I'm giving you permission on this visionary talk. We can talk about love. Yes, if you want to be a little more, a little less out there, you can talk about empathy. That's okay with me too. As a matter of fact, I've never known anybody, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this room or in the other rooms, I have never known anybody who does the work we do, who's out there defending the land, defending the rivers, defending the salmon, who says, Andy, I'm doing it because I want them to be more efficient. That's not why I did it. I fell in love as a young man and a fly fisherman. I fell in love with rivers and mountains, and I want to spend my life protecting them. And everybody's here because they fell in love at some point with some aspect of this great creation of Earth. That's why we're here, not because we want to see more efficient use of natural resources. So nothing wrong with efficiency, by the way. It is what you want a machine to do. You want your car to be efficient. You want your dishwasher to be efficient. But an animal is not the same as a machine, and a human isn't the same as a human animal. And that is a huge consciousness shift that the other side has accomplished by letting efficiency and not empathy balance each other instead of making efficiency. So when we speak in Congress, when we speak in front of, as I will, the Supreme Court, I'm going to have to try and speak the language of efficiency. I don't think it's going to be, I can't just bring seeds to the Supreme Court and say, aren't they beautiful, Clarence Thomas? Monsanto doesn't understand this. I love these seeds, even though it's true. So they have that consciousness shift, and I'll quickly go to another one, which is competition. They say, we love you guys. NRDC, no, you're good. You're doing great stuff, but if we were to take your suggestions, America would lose its competitive edge around the world. In a globalized world, that's very serious. Right? Competition. Well, let's go back to my kids. I say, okay, Nick, what'd you get on your report card? Straight A's. Excellent. Kailani, how'd you do? Oh, B-, average. Well, you lost, honey. You lost in the competition game, you're gone. You are the weakest link. Goodbye. And honey, I'm doing this because you have to be ready for the competitive globalized world out there. Goodbye. Right? How does NRDC work? You don't work, hopefully, I know you don't because I used to work here. You don't work in a competition base with one another. What do you have to do? What do we do together, like in Mass v. EPA? What do we do together? We are cooperative. That's how a society survives. This consciousness thing that you're solely going to do it on competition, well, that's not how you're going to get anything done. You're going to get done through collaboration, and the empathy that you're balancing efficiently is going to help with that. Those are new consciousness shifts we have to do. We have to balance the ethic of efficiency with that of empathy or love. We have to balance our competition, which is fine. I'm a big sports guy. I really took it on the chin with Georgetown yesterday. My bracket's destroyed. But I'm happy with that. But when competition becomes the actual fundamental ethic in a society, it becomes a blood sport of jobs, or between nations, where a winning nation it flourishes while the losing nation is lost in poverty and starvation. That is inappropriate, and that is wrong, and it's not what salmon economics teaches us. And so finally, what I think NRDC is about, and I think what we're trying to do with salmon economics, the other thing is progress. People will say, but you guys then are against progress. The guy once said to me, Andy, I bet you would have been against the combustion engine when it first came down. And I said, of course I'd be against the combustion engine. I'm a New Yorker. I've seen the Long Island Expressway at 5 o'clock. Of course I would be against it. But we then say, wait a minute, before you let anybody use the word progress on you, from our ecological perspective, we have to ask the question, progress towards what? What should a city look like? How should we grow our food? What should be the relationship between human and the rest of the planet? Is the rest of the planet there for us to manipulate, or are we just simply a subset of the greater ecology? These are fundamental questions, and I think a fundamental thing we have to do, all of us, particularly young people, is redefine that word progress. Don't let them have it. Say we don't think monocultured farms and genetically engineered crops and one farmer per 200,000 acres. That's not an agriculture I want to see. That is not the way I want the city done. This is not the manner in which we will treat our salmon. Genetically engineering salmon is not progress. Technology does not equal progress. And one of the great things about the organic movement is one of the major ways recently in human history where you've said actually fewer inputs is progress. No pesticides, fertilizer, no GMOs, no irradiation, that's progress in our food. So again, those are at least some of, so I don't just leave you to abstractions. Efficiency, competition, and their view that progress always equals technology and growth are some of the major consciousness things I think we have to overcome that are behind a lot of the battles we're fighting. So while we fight the battles in the trenches, I think we need to fight these consciousness battles as well. Thank you. And I'll take questions.
We're doing it in order.
I think we have time for a couple of quick questions from each office. There's nobody on the phone that emails me. So LA, and then San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and DC. LA?
There are no questions in LA.
San Francisco?
We don't have anything either.
Great, so New York? Oh, Chicago, sorry, Chicago?
No, but thank you for the excellent talk.
And then New York?
I have a question. But the NRDC, when you say to the thought of privileging the different economics, beside how does one do that? And we clearly don't privilege the 4 tenets of salmon economics that you laid out. How could our society do that?
I think the easiest one, Peter, I think the easiest one is this idea of the care economy. And I think there's been a real failure in this administration and all this discussion about tax relief to put a face on what this redistribution of our income does. You know, the face of the teacher, the face of the guy going up the stairs in 9/11, you know, the face of the person that's saving you when you have the heart attack, the face of the people that are out there defending nature. You know, it's a failure, because when you talk about tax relief and you use that narrative, you are already saying there's something bad that I am trying to relieve you of, right? It's like, you know, work saving, well, or job saving. Well, that means jobs are bad because we want to have fewer of them. You know, it's a narrative of tax relief. I was hoping somebody like Obama, because he has very transcendental kind of speech at times, is show a picture of the care economy, call it the care economy. That is what we're all paying for, and the whole thing is to pay our fair share. So I think we should shift as progressives from a tax relief and try and outcompete the Republicans and the Tea Party saying, oh no, we believe in that too, going, actually not. We depend on the redistribution of our incomes, depending on how much income you have, to this reciprocal relationship we have with everyone who's taking care of our kids in school, taking care of us in the hospitals, taking care of virtually every public sector out there. And we need to take care of that care economy. And we need to do it as a fair share economy. People should be paying their fair share. If you have a corporation with 1,000 people, well, all the roads that are people driving to, all of the telephone, all of those things are done based on a care economy. So you should pay your fair share. So that way you would privilege both the care economy, you would privilege the idea of redistribution and reciprocation, and privilege those people that are doing that work, instead of always romanticizing small business as if that was the core of all of America, when it's actually a very small percentage of Americans involved in small business. So nothing wrong with it. Again, as I said, many of the organic farmers I represent in court are small business people, and you know, and that's great, and I'm all for that, but it's not an accurate reflection. So, you know, I'm not sure I have greater wisdom beyond that, but that is one area where just a shift of narrative by one of our leaders would get us out of this whole wrong narrative of taxation as burden versus taxation as what is making the society run, and privileging those who serve, and also bringing up this new narration of fair share, so that you redistribute at a fair share. And I don't think it's terribly radical. I think Obama could do it. They just don't that narrative just hasn't unfortunately been out there enough. I know the last speaker was about media, and that's, media, we need to somehow get media to be using these kinds of different language and get on the media so people can understand these different narratives.
So I have a question. Dave Hawkins, Andy, nice to see you again. As you know, I mean, our job as advocates is to persuade the unpersuaded and sometimes the unpersuadable. And with that in mind, as I was listening, there were sort of three challenges that you may have been exposed to. I'd be interested in hearing your comments on it. One is that the idea of nature as model is very appealing, but it has sort of a high front-end investment. People actually have to understand what you're talking about, and that's not an easy job. The second is I would have expected that somebody at the Cato Institute would have said, well, wait a second, there is a market economy of sorts in natural systems. The species that efficiently manage scarcity survive, and the ones that don't fail. And the third challenge I'd be interested in hearing you respond to is, you mentioned that prior human civilizations never followed our market economy. They tended to mimic what the salmon teaches us, and I am sure that people have observed that most of those have been conquered, and being conquered isn't a good thing. So, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, to repeat the question, would that be helpful to repeat the question to people?
Oh, sorry, yes.
The different places. Okay. The three challenges brought forward here.
We heard fine.
Oh, we heard fine? Okay. So let me go in order if I could. I think another failure we've done, and this is a challenge to all the young people in this room, but some of us who are a little bit older, perhaps you maybe we're the only ones here.
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay, behind me here. Okay, so a couple other folks. Is that somehow, I don't know how this happened, and maybe because of the romantic, like from the Blake era before the anti-industrial movement, we call them the romantics. And I think there's something in the John Muir tradition, I love John Muir, so this is, there's gotten this kind of thing that you're romantic, you guys, sort of vibrant souls on the Appalachian Trail. And God bless, but I've got to make a living here, buddy. There is this, which I think is what first part of your question, and I think that reflects the failure I started talking about, which is that actually we are the realists. We are and it's not pleasant sometimes, but we're the only ones that are real. The gross national product is completely unreal. It doesn't mean anything. Wall Street down doesn't mean anything. I mean, a lot of people make money on it, but it's like Vegas. It doesn't really, it is, what's happening with water and non-renewables, that's real. And believe me, people will unfortunately come to discover that reality behind this enormous denial that's behind this entire bubble of what we call, the market system. That's unreal. It's as unreal as Vegas is. It's tempting, it's seductive, and God knows some people make money on it, a lot of people lose money on it, but it's not real. We are the realist. Ecology is reality. And it's the fundamental reality. It is the fundamental economics. And we have not been successful up to this point. And I think part of this is because you guys are dreamers. Sierra Club, NRDC, you guys are, you love nature and that's really sweet. But meanwhile, we're the realists. We're the hard-nosed bankers. Well, we just discovered they aren't realists. They're crooks. They're dreamers. There's the Madoff, but they're in denial. And it's our job to say, hey, society, and it's not pretty, and we have to sort of resist the Jimmy Carter putting on a sweater and lecturing, but we definitely also do have to say, hey, this is real, and we're gonna. And the problem is, we're gonna discover how real it is. Maybe not in my generation, but certainly in my grandchildren's generation. So that's one thing. It may be hard to accept on the front end, but it's actually the only reality there is. I mean, there can be a transcendent reality, but even that depends on our being alive to experience that transcendent reality. The second thing has to do with efficiency. And this is kind of the shadow side of trickle-down Darwinism, right? The trickle-down Darwinism is survival of the fittest and that, nature red in tooth and claw. Well, there's not a sophisticated, I mean, there's not a good scientist out there that believes that. It's sort of how it got trickled down and popular, and it kind of defends laissez-faire capitalism, social Darwinism, right? I mean, if that's how nature works, and that's how our economy works, and we're natural. But that's not how nature works, and we know that. It's not how the human body works. If you even try and imagine the cooperative relationship right now going on with virtually every aspect of your body, from the literally the histones that are working in inside to work onto the DNA and the RNA, and how all of them get arranged, and all of the unconscious things that are going on to allow me to speak right now. They're not competing with each other. They're not. It's not, my body's not the liver going, I'm going after you, heart, and I'm going to win. You know, I mean, all ecosystems are enormously cooperative systems. There can be some competition within them. And did Darwin underplay that? Absolutely. You know, Darwin isn't everything, but in post-Darwinian, anybody who's familiar with that science, the role of cooperation, and even in dialectical cooperation, in other words, not just simple cooperation, but long dialectical systems, has really, but I think the question is really serious, don't get me wrong, because the way it's trickled down is, instead of salmon economics being the natural model, for about 100 years in this country, a little over 100 years, it's the early 20th century, the people are saying, since Darwin proved that competition and red tooth and claw nature is the natural way, then laissez-faire capitalism is the way. That's been the social Darwinist. And if you look at Glenn Beck, if you look at the Tea Party, that is still actually the social Darwinian thing, you know, that's behind a lot of what they're saying. And so it's a very serious question, which again, we as ecologists have to actively say it just doesn't reflect reality. It reflects, you know, biology as determined by political philosophy, but it's not actually ecology. And your third, what was your third one?
Soulful civilizations get beat.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, and that's a good point, which is that, you know, with superior technology, particularly military technology, by the way, you know, you can conquer people. The problem is you can't conquer nature. I wrote 101 Ways to Help Save the Earth, but I now wish I had not used that title, because we're not really talking about saving the Earth, are we?
Right.
Earth's going to be
Fine.
not fine. That's a little too strong. I was going to say the same word though.
Yeah.
The Earth is going to be there, and we will have changed it in some extraordinary ways. The real thing that won't be there is us. So we're not really saving the Earth. We're trying to find a way in which the Homo sapien, we're really trying to redefine the humans at the species level. Right? We're trying to say, in the last 200, 300 years, our species assumed a new role as viewing progress as the manipulator and controller of nature, with nanotechnology and genetic engineering being the kind of reductio ad absurdum of that. But we're trying to say, no, while we use that technology to conquer other peoples, it doesn't conquer the laws of ecology. It does not conquer the laws of how this works. And believe me, all the genetic engineering and nanotechnology in the world are not going to change that. And so what's fundamental about the ecological worldview is, let me just give an example. There is a very good and wonderful academic pursuit out there called ecological economics. People heard of that, ecological economics? I have a problem with that, because the adjective is ecological and the noun is economics. That again shows the wrong mind view, the wrong worldview. Actually, our economics is a qualifier on ecology. We need to fit into that. So what we really need is an economic ecology. How does the human species fit into the ecological laws? We're going to be changing things, surely, but how do we fit into it? Because we may be able to conquer nations with our military, but we're not going to be able to conquer nature. You know, they thought that nature was going to be no match for genetic engineering, no match for industrial technology, but we're learning that we're no match. If we lose our water, we lose our non-renewables, our renewables, I should say, and we're no match for those laws. We will be the victims of them, and primarily the humans. So a lot of what we're doing here isn't just saving nature, we're actually trying to save ourselves as part of nature.
Shravya, were there any more questions in New York?
It doesn't seem like that.
We have one more in DC.
Oh, well, actually, wait. There actually is one quick question in New York, and we'll also have the answer for that. And if it's okay with DC, after that we might conclude the video feed, but you guys should totally carry on the discussion there, and of course we'll unfortunately miss that. But we'll take a question, the answer, and then Peter would like to say a word of thanks after that.
I just had kind of a straightforward question about what your opinion is here. We have a group that's working with the New York Office Committee kind of created a subcommittee recently where we're just researching food sustainability and vendor options kind of in the area for catering and member events and big things like that. And what we're trying to do is change the consciousness maybe as well as consumers, us being consumers, NRDC, paying vendors. And we're kind of looking into new ways to, try to figure out where our food comes from, our vendors. Are these organic farmers? Is it wild Alaskan salmon versus farm salmon in Maine? And so what we're trying to do is just research that and then see if maybe we can initiate a discussion with, the ops committee, or maybe even just talking with some PAs in the different offices about what we can do to educate ourselves better. And do you have any suggestions of things that maybe we could look into, or maybe do you think, especially even dealing with salmon or fish, is there something specifically that maybe we should be limiting out of our purchases, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's great, and let me just quickly say on the food issue, one of the great things about the food issue, and one of the reasons I've worked in it for so many years, is it's something that everybody can do tomorrow or today to reflect this new worldview. Don't eat industrial meat. No GMOs. Go organic. Go vegetarian. Go vegan. You can reflect it's so hard in this society. I don't even know where the lights in this building are coming from. They could come from Calvert. Actually, this building maybe not. But in normal buildings, you don't know if it's a nuclear power plant, or you can't really control. I can't really control where my taxpayer dollars go. I'm against both wars and rocket, but my taxpayers are going. There's so little you can control. But food is a place where all of us, including groups, can really start reflecting that worldview right away. I call it an entree to a new worldview, but don't go there. And salmon, of course, yeah. There's a big fight right now at the organic, and I won't go into any details about whether there can be organic salmon. Whether if you have farm salmon without antibiotics, etc., is that okay? Now, we as an organization, CFS has opposed that, because we think that you have to feed so many fish to salmon that it just doesn't make sense anyway. You should not have predator fish as farm fish. You can have, tilapia, for example. That would be okay. But it's a good sign that we're even thinking about that. Copper River, of course, salmon is where you want to go right now, as far as salmon is concerned. But we also have on our website, centerforfoodsafety.org, we have the endangered fish stuff, and we also have on our Cool Foods campaign on our website. You can go to all the carbon, all the local places you can go for local foods that are made locally, because that's a huge thing having to do with agriculture and global warming. So if you go to the Cool Foods website, you can see that, and it's really a great thing. The only thing I would say is that, and Ralph Nader is a teacher and friend of mine, even despite 2000, and there is a problem with that word consumer, though. Talk about consciousness changing, which is, they used to call tuberculosis consumption. You know why? Ate away the bodies. They got very thin. We talk about fire as consuming. So I'm not real comfortable. We all use it. I'm not going after you at all. I use it. But I think we should try and not use the word consumer, because it's very passive. I'm a consumer. Really? That's all you are? You just consume? You just like a termite or something? You're just like a consumer? Whether we like it or not, we're all creators, right? Whether we like it or not, the food that NRDC decides to buy, and I think you're doing great to get conscious raising on that, we're going to create a different future for the salmon, a different future for topsoil, a different future for farmers. I was just in Iowa, the big USDA DOJ hearings on antitrust and agriculture. Every decision we make, and I don't always make the right decision myself, so I'm not suggesting I'm top of the mountain here, but at least we need to each of us know and get to all of our groups and all of our public that you're making a decision whether you like it or not, for a very different future for the 10 billion animals that we use every year in our and our food system. So we're not, and just like we're not consumers as far as politics, we're citizens. And in our decisions on what we grow and buy, we're creators, not consumers. And I think getting out of that passive role that they like to put us in is also just a nice consciousness way. But anyway, you got my information. If you want to contact me personally on this, we're happy to help. We've done a lot of work on local foods, on the salmon issue and stuff. I'm happy to help guide your committee there.
Thank you. Thank you. Concluding thoughts from Peter?
Just thank you, and also thank you to Shravya and everybody else who's too numerous to mention to put this all together. Obviously, thank you to Andy for joining us. I just will say, he did mention another Supreme Court case. I mentioned at the beginning that the International Center for Technology Assessment, for those of you who came late, was the organization that first filed the petition that led to the Mass v. EPA Supreme Court case. And he's now in the Supreme Court in a case, Monsanto v. Gerster Seed, dealing with a fairly technical issue of preliminary injunction standards, but NRDC is, again, joining them and putting in an amicus in that case. So we've worked together a long time, and we are grateful to have Andy here. And this is a terrific talk, and I'm sure we'll be following up. So thank you, and good luck to everybody in the DC office.
Thank you. Sure. If people want to just talk, people
Still
want
the
to
queue.
ahead,
I'll
Chuck.
stay.
I've also got a bunch of salmon economics, the actual whole thing.